By the time my son rang the doorbell at 6:30 the next morning, expecting me to hand him a cashier's check for $320,000, he'd find a different lock on the door, an empty garage where my Buick used to sit, and a manila envelope with his name written on it in my handwriting. What he didn't know yet was that the envelope didn't contain what he came for. It contained something that would make him drop to his knees right there on the porch, in full view of the Hendersons walking their golden retriever across the street. My name is Walt. Walter, technically. But nobody's called me that since my wife passed 4 years ago. I'm 68 years old, a retired structural engineer, and until a Tuesday afternoon in late September, I would have told you I was the kind of father who'd give his only son the shirt off his back. I would have meant it too. I'd been doing it for 40 years. The problem with being that kind of father is that nobody warns you what happens when your kid stops asking for the shirt and starts demanding the whole closet. The phone call came at 3:15 on a Tuesday. I remember because I was in the workshop behind my house, sanding down a cherry wood drawer for a chest I was building for my granddaughter Lila. She's 6, my late daughter Marion's girl, and she's the only piece of my heart that still warps the way it used to. I'd been planning that chest since June. Hand-cut dovetails, brass pulls I'd ordered from a shop in Maine. The kind of project a man does when he's trying to leave something behind that means something. The phone rang, and I wiped my hands on the rag I keep in my back pocket and walked into the kitchen. The caller ID said, Bryce, my son. Dad, he said. And right away I knew something was off because he didn't ask how I was. He didn't say hello. He just said, Dad, in that voice he uses when he wants something and has already decided he's going to get it. Dad, I need to talk to you. Something serious. I'm listening. Not on the phone. I need to come over. Tonight, if possible, or tomorrow morning, first thing. What's going on, son? There was a pause. I could hear him breathing through his nose the way he does when he's trying to control himself. My boy is 41 years old. He has a wife named Holly, 2 kids, a mortgage on a house in a development in Cary that I told him not to buy because the HOA fees alone were going to crush him. He didn't listen. He never listens. I'll explain when I see you, he said. It's about the business. There's a situation. I just need you to be there in the morning, okay? 8 o'clock. Don't make plans. He hung up before I could answer. I stood there in the kitchen with the phone in my hand and looked out the window at the bird feeder my wife Carol put up the spring before her diagnosis. There was a pair of cardinals on it. Carol used to say cardinals were her mother visiting. I'm not the kind of man who believes in that sort of thing, but I never took the feeder down. I called Bryce back twice that afternoon. Both times it went to voicemail. He showed up at 7:50 the next morning in a suit I'd never seen him wear before. Charcoal gray, fitted, with a pocket square of all things. My son, the marketing executive who'd quit his salaried job 2 years ago to start what he called a boutique branding agency, with a buddy from college. He had a leather portfolio under his arm, and the kind of hollowed-out look around the eyes that I've only ever seen on men who haven't slept in a week. I poured him coffee. He waved it off and asked for water instead. Dad, he said, sitting down at the kitchen table where he'd done his homework as a kid, where Carol used to make him eat his peas, where the 3 of us had eaten Sunday breakfast for 30-some years. Dad, I'm in trouble, real trouble, the kind where I need your help, and I need it now, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything. I said, all right. What he laid out over the next 40 minutes was a story so polished and so full of specific dollar figures that I knew before he was halfway through that he'd rehearsed it. He told me the agency had landed a major client in July, a national hotel chain, 6-figure contract, with a much bigger one to follow if the first campaign performed. To service the contract, he and his partner had taken out a bridge loan. They'd hired 3 new employees. They'd leased better office space in Raleigh. Then, 2 weeks ago, the hotel chain had gone through a leadership change, and the new CMO had paused all outside vendor contracts pending review. 60 days, minimum. We can't survive 60 days, Dad. We've got payroll Friday. We've got the office lease. We've got the bridge loan coming due. If we miss any of it, the whole thing collapses. The hotel chain comes back. They come back to a company that doesn't exist anymore. How much? I asked him. He took a breath. $320,000. To bridge the gap. The hotel contract alone, when it resumes, is $650, so you'd be made whole inside 90 days. I'll sign anything. I'll put it in writing. Promissory note, interest, whatever you want. I sat there with my hands folded on the table. I could feel the wood grain through the skin of my palms because I'd sanded the underside of that table myself in 1989, the year we bought the house. I need to think about it, I said. He didn't like that. He'd come in expecting a yes. I could see his jaw working. Dad, there isn't time. Friday is in 3 days. Then I'll have an answer for you by Friday. But I'm not writing a check today, and I'm not writing one tomorrow. $300,000 is not a number I move around without thinking. He nodded too quickly. Of course, Dad, please. This is my whole life. Everything Holly and I have built. The kids, Tucker and Emerson. Their school. I can't lose this. I can't tell them we have to sell the house. He left around 9. He hugged me at the door, which he hasn't done since his mother's funeral. He said, I love you, Dad, and I said it back, because I do, and because I didn't yet know I was going to spend the next 36 hours discovering that almost nothing my son had told me at that table was true. I'd like to say I knew right away. I'd like to say I sniffed it out the moment he said the words bridge loan. The truth is, I almost wrote the check. I almost drove down to the bank that afternoon and started the wire process. The reason I didn't is because of something that happened around 11 that morning, 2 hours after Bryce left. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Holly, my daughter-in-law. Now, Holly and I have always gotten along. Quietly, carefully. She's a private person, a school counselor. She keeps her cards close. I've always respected that. The text was short. It said, Walt, when you have a minute, can we talk? Just you and me. It's important. That was it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, how's now? She came over at noon. She had her youngest, Emerson, with her, and she set him up on the living room rug with a pile of trucks I keep in a basket for when the grandkids visit. Then she sat down at the kitchen table where Bryce had sat 3 hours earlier, and she put her hands flat on the wood, and she looked at me. Did he ask you for money? That's the first thing she said. I didn't lie to her. I told her yes. I told her how much. I told her the story he'd told me about the hotel chain, the bridge loan, the leadership change. Holly closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were wet. But she wasn't crying. She was past crying. She was at the place women get to when they've been carrying something alone for too long. Walt, she said, there is no hotel chain. There never was. I want you to understand what that sentence felt like. I'm a man who spent 50 years believing that if you build a foundation right, the structure will hold. The whole career I had was about that. You measure twice. You don't take shortcuts. You assume the load and you build past it. Sitting at that table while my son's wife told me the foundation I'd been standing on was made of paper, I felt the floor tilt under my chair. She told me, slowly and in order, what she actually knew. The agency was in trouble, yes, but not because of any contract pause. The agency was in trouble because Bryce and his partner had been hemorrhaging money for 15 months on lifestyle expenses charged to the business. A leased Audi for Bryce. A leased Audi for the partner. A box at a sports stadium they'd talked themselves into believing was for client entertainment. Dinners. Trips. A creative retreat in Tulum that was just a vacation with photos of laptops staged on the beach. And there was something else. Holly had found out 2 months ago that Bryce had taken a personal loan against their house, $110,000, without telling her. Without her signature. He'd forged it. She'd discovered it because the lender had called the home line by mistake when she happened to be sitting next to it. He told me he'd fix it, she said. He told me he had it under control. He told me he had a deal lined up that was going to make everything right. I gave him 60 days. That was the end of August. I said I would not file before 60 days, but if I didn't see the loan paid off and a new accountant on the books by November 1st, I was done. I was taking the kids, and I was filing. He's known that for 2 months, Walt. So whatever he told you this morning, that wasn't a hotel chain falling through. That was a deadline I gave him running out. I asked her how she knew he'd come to me. Because I was in the kitchen yesterday afternoon when he was on the phone with his partner. He was in the garage. He didn't know I'd come downstairs. He said, and I'm quoting him, he said, "Don't worry about the loan. The old man is going to write it. He always does." I sat with that for a long time. The old man is going to write it. He always does. I'd like to tell you I didn't cry. I didn't in front of her, but I went out to the workshop after she left, and I sat on the stool at the bench where I'd been sanding the cherry drawer for Lila, and I put my face in my hands, and I cried the way an old man cries, which is without any sound at all, just shoulders shaking and tears running down into a beard you forgot to trim. I cried for about 10 minutes. Then I stood up and washed my face in the utility sink and walked back into the house, and I started doing what I do best, which is gathering information. I called my lawyer first. His name's Frank. He's been my attorney since 1997, and he picked up on the second ring even though I knew he was probably in the middle of something. "Frank," I said, "I need an hour of your time today. I need it to be confidential, and I need it to be nothing you've ever billed under my name before." He said, "Come in at 4. While I was waiting, I did what Holly didn't quite have the standing to do, which was pull every public record on my son's company that I could find. I'm not a tech wizard, but I know how to use the Secretary of State's business filings. I know how to look up commercial liens. I know how to search court records, which my wife taught me when she was working in real estate and had to pull title histories. What I found in 2 hours at my kitchen table made me go back to the workshop and pour myself 2 fingers of the bourbon Carol had bought me for our 40th anniversary, which I'd been saving for an occasion. The agency had 3 open civil judgments against it from vendors. 2 of those vendors were small businesses, family operations. One of them owned by a single mother who'd done graphic design for them for a year and was owed $11,000. The agency had been sued in small claims twice in the last 6 months. There was a tax lien from the state of North Carolina for unpaid withholding taxes. The leased autos were not leased through the business. They were leased personally, both of them in Bryce's name, which meant if the business went under, Bryce was personally on the hook for both, and the personal loan against the house. That was real. I found the recording in the Wake County records. 110,000, just like Holly had said, signed and notarized in May. I went to Frank's office at 4. I sat down across from him and I told him everything. He's a man my age, slightly older, who's seen a lot. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired, the way good lawyers look when they have to tell a client what they already suspect. "What do you want to do, Walt? I want to know what my options are." "You have several." He leaned back. "Option 1, you write the check. You become the next vendor on the list of people he doesn't pay. Option 2, you don't write the check. He blames you for the collapse, and you live with that, and so does he. Option 3, you restructure things. You sell, you move, you put your assets where he can't reach them, and you let the consequences of his decisions finally land on the person who made them. The third option is harder, but it's the only one I'd respect a man for. What about Holly and the kids? That's the whole question, isn't it? We talked for 2 hours. I left his office at 6:15 with a yellow legal pad full of notes and a plan that, if I'm being honest, scared me more than anything I'd done since I asked Carol to marry me in 1978. I'll tell you what I did over the next 33 hours, because the order matters. That night, I called my real estate friend Doug, who'd been after me for years to sell the house. I told him I was finally ready, and I needed it to happen fast, off-market if possible, and I'd take a haircut on the price for speed. He had a buyer by 10 o'clock the next morning. A cash buyer, a young couple who'd been looking in the neighborhood for 18 months, 40,000 under what I could have gotten in a normal sale. But I could close in 14 days. I called Holly back that night. I told her I was not writing the check. I told her what I was planning. I told her very specifically that I needed to know what she wanted because what I was about to do would create consequences for her and the kids, whether she wanted them or not, and she had a right to weigh in. She listened to all of it. Then she said, "Walt, do it, do all of it, and do something else for me, if you would." Tell me. Don't tell him I told you anything. Let him find out the way he was always going to find out. I need to be the one to tell him I'm filing, in my own time, in my own way. I don't want him connecting me to your decision. Not for the kids' sake. They love their father. He's going to need them, eventually. I told her she had my word. The next morning at 8, I drove to Frank's office and I signed papers. I created an irrevocable trust. The beneficiaries were my granddaughter Leela, my grandsons Tucker and Emerson, and a woman named Diane Espinoza, who was the graphic designer my son's company had stiffed for $11,000. I looked her up. She had 2 kids. She was working 2 jobs, and Bryce's company had been ducking her invoices for a year. The trust was funded with the cash from the house sale, plus the bulk of my retirement accounts, minus a sum I kept liquid for myself to live on. Frank set it up so that none of it was reachable by my son under any circumstances, including in the event of my death. The only person with discretion over distributions, besides me while I was living, was Frank himself, acting as trustee. I'd like to be clear about something. I did not disinherit my son out of cruelty. I did not do it to punish him in some abstract way. I did it because the man I was looking at by Wednesday afternoon was not a man who could be helped by money. He was a man who would be destroyed by it. Every dollar I'd ever given him, going back to his first car at 16, had been a sandbag against a flood that was building somewhere upstream. By the time he sat at my kitchen table on Tuesday morning, the flood had arrived. More money would not stop it. More money would only mean that when the water finally went down, my son would still not have learned to swim. I left a small line in the trust for him, a modest line. Triggered only on conditions, he would have access to a defined sum, paid out in installments over 5 years, if and only if he completed a state-recognized financial counseling program, maintained continuous employment for 36 months, and signed a written acknowledgement of the harm he had caused his wife and children. Frank would verify. I wasn't trying to crush my boy. I was trying to give him a door he could walk through. On the other side of the wall, I was about to build. Thursday morning, I packed 2 suitcases and the cherry chest for Leela, which I finished sanding at 1 in the morning and rubbed with 3 coats of tung oil by sunrise. I hugged my workshop. I'm not embarrassed to say that. I'd built that workshop with my own hands in 1991, and I'd spent more hours in it than in any other room of any house I'd ever owned. I left it clean. I left the bench swept and the tools hung up. I left the bourbon on the shelf where Carol had put it. I'd rented a small farmhouse outside of Asheville, 300 miles west. Doug had a contact through his church. A widow named Mrs. Keppel was looking for a long-term tenant who could keep up the property. 6-month lease to start, with an option to renew. She'd left a key and a coffee can on the back porch. Thursday afternoon, I dropped the cherry chest off at Holly's house. She wasn't expecting me. I told her I was leaving town and I wasn't sure when I'd be back. I told her the trust documents had been filed, and that Frank would be in touch with her separately about the portion of the trust that was for the boy's education. I told her where I was going, but not the address, only the town, and I asked her not to tell Bryce until she was ready, on her own timeline. She hugged me. She held on for a long time. She said, "He didn't deserve you. I want you to know that I know what you just gave up. I see it. I see all of it." I drove away. I had to pull over twice on the way to the highway because my eyes weren't working right. Thursday night, I taped the manila envelope to my front door. The locksmith came at 5. New deadbolts, new strike plates, the whole package. The locksmith was a kid in his 20s, polite, who asked no questions. The driveway was empty. The Buick was packed. By 8 that night, I was in a motel outside Hickory, eating a grocery store sandwich, watching the local news on a TV bolted to the wall. The envelope contained one document. It was a copy of a letter I'd written by hand on a yellow legal pad and then typed and printed out clean. I'll tell you what it said, more or less, because I've thought about it every day since. It said, "Son, by the time you read this, I've sold the house. I'm not telling you where I've gone. I will not be reachable by phone for some time. You came to my kitchen table this week and you asked me for $320,000. You told me a story about a hotel chain. I want you to know that I know there is no hotel chain. I know about the personal loan you took against your house without your wife's signature. I know about the lawsuits. I know about the tax lien. I know about the audits. I know about Diane Espinoza and the $11,000 you have not paid her, even while you're leasing a luxury car and entertaining clients in a stadium box. I am not writing you the check. I want you to understand what is happening here. Because I am only going to say this once. You are 41 years old. You have a wife and 2 children. You're the only person who can save your business or let it die. You are the only person who can repair your marriage or let it end. You are the only person who can become the man your sons need you to be. Money cannot do any of those things for you. If I gave you the $320,000, I would be paying a tuition at a school you are not enrolled in. What I have done with the money, I have placed the bulk of my estate into a trust that you cannot access under your current circumstances. There is a path back, and Frank has a copy of the terms. I have set aside funds for the education of my grandchildren, which neither I nor your wife will allow you to touch. I have paid $11,000 to Diane Espinoza, with interest, with a note that said the payment was on behalf of a client of yours who failed to honor an obligation. I did not give my name. I love you. I've loved you since the morning your mother and I brought you home from the hospital in 1984, in a snowstorm, in a Chevy Citation that didn't have heat. Loving you has never been the question. The question has always been whether love is enough to make a man into himself. And the answer, I am sorry to tell you, is no. The rest of that work is yours. Your father. I signed it. I drove the rest of the way to Asheville on Friday morning. The farmhouse was a clapboard place with a wraparound porch and a view of a low ridge to the west. Mrs. Keppel had left a basket of muffins on the kitchen counter, which I thought was kindness past the point of obligation. I unloaded the Buick. I made up the bed in the back room. I sat on the porch as the afternoon light went orange, and I thought about my son standing on the porch of the house I'd just sold, holding an envelope. He called Frank that morning. Frank called me at 4. He said, "He's been on the phone for 40 minutes. He's tried everything. Threats, tears, demands to know where you are." I told him what I'm legally obligated to tell him, which is that you're alive, you're well, and you've made arrangements that I'm not at liberty to discuss. He asked if you'd lost your mind. I told him no, you'd found it. I asked Frank if Bryce had said anything else. He asked about the trust. I told him there was a path, and I would mail him the terms. He said he didn't want the terms. He wanted his father. I told him those are not, at the moment, the same thing. I stayed in Asheville for the next 8 months. I built a smaller workshop in Mrs. Corna, Keppel's barn, with her permission. I made furniture. I sold a few pieces at a craft fair in October, which was the first time in my life I'd ever taken money for something I'd made with my own hands, and I cried in the parking lot afterwards, which I hadn't expected. I joined a men's group at a Methodist church, even though I'm not particularly religious, because Carol had always told me I needed a place where I had to talk to people I didn't know. I went on long walks. I read books I'd been meaning to read for 30 years. I called Holly every 2 weeks. I called Lila and her mother, my late daughter's husband Dean, every Sunday, because Lila had started kindergarten and she was reading and she wanted to read to me on the phone. I sent her postcards from every town I drove through. I did not call my son. He called me eventually, not in the first month, not in the second. He called me in February, on a cold Saturday morning, on a number I'd given to Frank with instructions to release it only if Bryce met certain conditions. none of which involved demanding anything. The conditions had been met. He'd signed up for the financial counseling program. He'd taken a job, a real job, a salaried job, at a much smaller agency than the one he'd lost, which had folded in November the way a wet bag folds. He and Holly had separated formally, but he was paying her on time and seeing the boys on weekends, and, according to Holly, who I trusted to tell me the truth, he was showing up. He was actually showing up. When he called, I was on the porch of the farmhouse, drinking coffee, watching a woodpecker work on a dead pine across the field. "Dad," he said. "Son." There was a silence. A long one. He started to cry. I didn't say anything. I let him cry. I'd tried in my workshop in September. He was overdue. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know." I didn't know what I was doing. I knew. I knew what I was doing. That's the thing. I knew. I know that too. Holly told me. About what you did for the woman. The designer. She said you paid her. She said you didn't even put your name on it. "That wasn't for you, son. That was so I could sleep at night. There's a difference." He cried some more. I watched the woodpecker. Eventually he said, "Are you ever coming back?" "I don't know yet. Maybe." The house is gone, you understand. The workshop's gone. There's nothing in Cary to come back to except the people. So it depends on the people. I am one of the people. You are. You're going to have to be one of them for a while before I can answer that question, though. You understand? He said he did. We talked for 40 minutes. He told me about the new job, about a coworker he'd been honest with about his finances, about the Tuesday and Thursday nights he had with Tucker and Emerson, about how Tucker had asked him in October where Grandpa went. I asked him what he'd told Tucker. He said, "I told him Grandpa was on a trip and we'd see him when he came back." And then I told him the truth, the next week. I told him Grandpa needed some space because Daddy had made some bad choices. Tucker asked if it was his fault. I told him no. It was the first true thing I'd said to either of those kids in a year. I came back, eventually. I came back in pieces. A weekend in May for Lila's first dance recital. A week in July when Holly's mother had surgery and somebody needed to be at the house with the boys. A longer stay in October. I rented an apartment in Cary, a small one, because I couldn't be without my own front door. I kept the farmhouse outside Asheville for another year. The trust is still in place. It will be in place when I die, and Frank will administer it, and my grandchildren will have what they need for school and what's left when they're grown. There's a small line still drawn for my son, pegged to the conditions, and as of this writing, he's met every one of them for almost 3 years running. He's started receiving the installments. He puts most of them toward the personal loan he forged against his house, which Holly forgave him for in writing about a year ago in a letter she let me read, which is not my story to tell. Diane Espinoza, the graphic designer, runs her own agency now. A small one. I sent her a Christmas card the second year, anonymous, with a check for a startup grant. She knows it's me by now. She figured it out. She sent me a card back last year with a photo of her 2 kids in front of their new house, and on the back she'd written one line. "Some people pay debts that aren't theirs. Thank you." I keep that card in a drawer in my workshop, next to the brass pulls I never used on Lila's chest, because I decided she wanted glass knobs instead, which she picked out herself at a hardware store in West Asheville on a Saturday morning when the leaves were just starting to turn. My son and I have breakfast every Sunday morning now, at a diner near his apartment. He pays. I let him. That's part of it too. I think about that envelope sometimes, taped to the door of a house I no longer own. I think about my son standing on the porch reading it. I think about how long it took him to drive home that morning, and what he said to Holly when he got there, and what she said back, and the years of work between then and now. I'd give a lot of money to undo most of what got us to that morning. I would not undo the morning itself. The morning itself was the only thing that worked. There are men, I know, who'd say I was too hard on my boy. There are others who'd say I was too soft, that I should have cut him off entirely, that the trust line for him was a weakness. I'm not interested in either argument. What I know is that I had two choices that September, and one of them was a check, and one of them was an envelope. I picked the envelope. My son is alive, and my grandsons have their father, and a woman in Raleigh got paid for work she did, and an old man in a farmhouse outside Asheville learned, very late in life, that loving someone and rescuing them are not the same verb. That's my story. That's the whole of it. If you've got a son or a daughter you love too much to look at clearly, I'd say gently, look anyway. Not because love is the problem. Because love that won't look is not love. It's something else. Wearing love's coat. I'm Walt. I'm 68. I'll be 69 in March. Somewhere in Cary, North Carolina, my son is making his son's French toast, badly the way I used to make it for him, and I'll see them all on Sunday. I've thought about that Tuesday afternoon 1,000 times since, sanding cherry wood at my workbench when the phone rang and changed everything. And what I keep coming back to, sitting on this porch in Asheville with coffee going cold in my hand, is that nothing about what happened was sudden. Bryce didn't become the man at my kitchen table overnight. He became him over 40 years of small moments, most of them mine. Every time I covered a tuition shortfall without asking what the shortfall was for, every time I quietly paid off a credit card he'd run up in college, every time I let "I'll get you back, Dad" stand in for actual repayment, I was building him one rescue at a time into a man who couldn't fall because I had stationed myself permanently underneath him. The cause was love. The effect was a son who, at 41, looked his father in the eye and lied for 32 minutes straight about a hotel chain that didn't exist. The hardest thing I've had to learn, and I'm still learning it, is that love and rescue are not the same verb. They feel the same. They feel exactly the same when your boy is on the phone telling you he's about to lose everything. But love asks what kind of man this person is becoming, and rescue only asks how to stop the bleeding tonight. For 4 decades, I confused the two, and the bill came due in a manila envelope taped to a door of a house I no longer owned. If there's anything I'd want a man my age to take from this, it's that character is not built by what we give our children. It's built by what we let them carry. Bryce's mind was sharp enough to run a marketing agency. He just hadn't been asked to use it for hard things because I'd been doing the hard things for him. His will was strong enough to rebuild after losing everything. He just hadn't been given the chance to discover that, because I'd never let him lose anything. And the moral compass he eventually found, the one that led him to make breakfast for his sons on Sunday mornings now, that compass had always been in his pocket. He just hadn't been required to read it. Knowledge of right, strength to do right, and the discipline to keep doing it when no one's watching. Those are 3 different muscles, and you can't build any of them for somebody else. You can only step back and let them be needed. I miss the workshop in Cary. I miss Carol every day. I do not miss the man I was on Tuesday morning before that phone call, walking around believing I was a good father because I never said no. The good father is the one who can, the one who looks at his son with clear eyes and says, "This far and not 1 inch farther, because I love you too much to keep paying the tuition at a school you're not enrolled in." I learned that at 68. I hope, if you're listening, you don't have to wait that long.